Hey lore lovers, my name's Eric with the Lorebrarians YouTube channel. With the upcoming release of the Time Spiral Remastered set, now is the perfect opportunity to take a step through both space and time as we explore the events leading to and culminating in the titular Time Spiral crisis that unfolded on the plane of Dominaria. But before we begin, if you're a fan of lore and storytelling, or if Magic the Gathering is dear to you, consider subscribing to the channel where lore videos are uploaded regularly. The support is much appreciated. Alright, time to grab our chronometers and compasses as we set out to traverse the dangerous and temporally unstable surface of Dominaria. Let's dive in. The temporal crisis, also referred to as the time spiral crisis, was an erratic and nearly irreparable change in the fabric of space and time that devastated much of Dominaria in the year 4500 AR. Set off by a chain of cascading events throughout the history of the plane, the temporal crisis was the culmination of several centuries worth of powerful magic that slowly ate away at the flow of time. It saw the melding of alternate realities and of past or future. It saw the destruction of continents, civilizations, and species, the death and sacrifice of several planeswalkers, and it led to a fundamental shift in the nature of the planeswalker spark across the multiverse. But to fully appreciate such a dramatic event in Magic the Gathering's history, we must first travel back in time and explore the circumstances that caused it, beginning over 4,000 years ago with the Brothers' War. Before gaining Planeswalker status, Urza was a renowned artificer who spent much of his life competing and eventually warring with his younger brother Mishra. Under the influence of artificial agents from the metallic plane of Phyrexia and half-metal himself, Mishra led Phyrexian forces against Urza in the Brothers' War that ravaged much of Tertiaire. The conflict came to a head in 63 AR on the island of Argoth when Urza poured mana into the Golgothian Sylex and used the artifact to detonate the Sylex Blast, eradicating Mishra, the Phyrexians, and much of Argoth, as well as igniting his Planeswalker Spark. This is illustrated in the card Urza's Ruinous Blast. A side effect of the Sylex Blast was the creation of the Shard of the 12 Worlds, which trapped 12 planes within and prevented interplanar travel out of or into the Shard. More importantly for the future crisis, the magic unleashed with the Sylex created the first temporal rift, a fracture in the planar fabric due to the imbalance between raw primal elements of the multiverse and the immense power of godlike planeswalkers. Although still strongly intact, the fabric of reality was beginning to unfurl. The second blow to the flow of time occurred many centuries later on the island of Tolaria in 3307 AR. The Tolarian Academy, under the guidance of Urza Planeswalker and Baron, began experimenting with time and temporal manipulation as a means to attack the Phyrexian threat to Dominaria that loomed ever nearer. If they could not defeat the machines in the present, perhaps they could in the past and prevent future losses. Urza and Baron created a temporal device and built the Silver Golem Karn to act as a probe to be sent back in time. Before they could perfect their machine, however, Phyrexian sleeper agents attacked the Academy, killing dozens of students, including the Artificer Joyra, Karn's first and only friend. Grieving Joyra's death, Karn rushed into the machine and went back in time to save her, if not prevent the attack altogether. But his temporal manipulation proved too much of a strain on the prototype device, and although he saved Joyra, the machine suffered a catastrophic failure and exploded in a massive burst of energy that created several erratic and variable time rifts on the island. This is seen in the card Sunder and Karn's Temporal Sundering. The Tolarian Rift destroyed the Academy, killed many, and created the second major tear in the temporal flow on Dominaria. Multiple other dangerously large rifts formed as a consequence of the Phyrexian Invasion of Dominaria in the early 4200s AR. The Wrathy Overlay, Yawgmoth's plan to use the artificially created Plane of Wrath as a staging ground for hundreds of thousands of Phyrexian invaders to attack Dominaria as the planes overlapped another, created massive tears in the spatio-temporal fabric of Dominaria. One such rift formed over the island of Urborg as the stronghold, the seat of power for Wrath's leaders, coalesced inside a dormant Urborg volcano. Another formed in Keld when the Planeswalker Freyalise deposited and protected the Wrathy Forest of Skyshroud, which can be seen in the card Skyshroud Blessing. When the Phyrexian Invasion began in earnest, the Chronomancer and Planeswalker Teferi sought a way to protect his home of Zhalfir and the region of Shiv from Yawgmoth's forces. An alternative presented itself when Teferi used built-up energy from Phyrexian planar portals to fuel a massive phasing spell that phased Zhalfir and Shiv out of the time stream. This is illustrated in the card Teferi's Moat and Teferi's Protection. But this much meddling with the time stream created two more dangerous rifts surrounding the regions where Shiv and Zhalfir once stood. The final blow to the temporal fabric occurred with the birth and death of Corona the False God in 4306 AR. A being given form as the manifestation of all mana on Dominaria, Corona was birthed with the fusion of Jeska or Phage, Akroma, and Zagorka. Her immense power devastated much of the plane, and her unique connection to Dominaria's mana prevented others from utilizing it as either resource or life source. As such, a mana drought stagnated growth or development across the plane's surface. Corona's life was short-lived, however, and with her death within the same year, Dominaria's mana once more became accessible, but its very nature shifted. It grew more difficult to wield, more dangerous to draw upon, choking the land, creating new time rifts, and transforming the existing rifts into even more erratic and harmful anomalies in the temporal fabric. It's now, in 4500 AR, that the culmination of all the splits and fraying ends in the weave of reality, all of the shifts and cuts in the time stream, come to the breaking point. With more strain than the plane or the multiverse could bear, Dominaria exploded into a spatio-temporal catastrophe known as the Temporal Crisis. The time rifts of the Temporal Crisis surged across the surface of Dominaria. These tears in the fabric bent reality. They led to alternate pasts and connected possible futures, which can be seen in many of the time or color-shifted cards of the Time Spiral block. As hundreds of timelines intersected across Dominaria, the rifts also twisted magic and mana on the plane. They began drawing in mana, killing off many species and desiccating much of the surface, suffocating the life force of Dominaria. They bent the rules of magic, and those who cast spells near or with the power of the rifts created erratic and dangerous new forms of magic. Most spells, however, became impossible to cast at all. In this new and hostile environment, those creatures that survived adapted to the harsh reality of Dominaria. We can see this hardy adaptability highlighted in the flavor text of cards such as Bone Splitter Sliver and Ashcoat Bear. With the nexus of the multiverse dying, and with the landscape becoming increasingly toxic, the fate of Dominaria teetered on the edge. Planeswalkers, the godlike beings responsible for causing many of the temporal rifts, turned inwards and realized that the only way to save the plane they put in jeopardy was to work to seal the rifts. Despite their awesome power, the dangerous rifts were nearly impossible to close without great sacrifice on the part of the Planeswalkers. Teferi sacrificed his own Planeswalker Spark to phase the island nation of Shiv back into the time stream. His sacrifice is noted in the flavor text of Teferi Mage of Zhalfir. But he was unable to save his home of Zhalfir. The newly reborn Jeska sought the aid of Radha, a half-human, half-elf with a latent Planeswalker Spark, to assist her in sealing the rift above Zhalfir. Jeska took Radha against her will and used her as a lens to channel enough mana to seal the rift, forever locking Teferi's home out of the time stream. Jeska took Radha to the Yavimaya rift and once more used her as a lens to channel mana. This time, however, Radha's latent Planeswalker Spark was sacrificed, but Jeska sealed the dangerous rift. Meanwhile, the Panther Planeswalker Lord Windgrace went to seal the rift above the stronghold on his home of Urborg. At the request of Teferi and Karn, Windgrace used his magic to close the rift before a horde of Phyrexians could come pouring through it. As the rift began to implode, it sucked the Planeswalker into it. As his body vanished from existence, Lord Windgrace suffused his spirit into Urborg, continuing to watch over his home even after death. Another Planeswalker sacrificed themselves in order to seal a rift. Freyalise, the Guardian of Skyshroud, realized that she had to close the rift around Keld that was caused in part by her intervention during the Wrathy overlay. With no other alternative, the Planeswalker sacrificed her adopted home as well as her own life to seal the dangerous time rift. But another dangerous rift existed on the continent of Madara. Here, the physically dead Elder Dragon Planeswalker Nicol Bolas manifested as an ethereal shade, and using Venser's latent Planeswalker spark, as well as the alternate realities of the time rifts, brought himself back into being as the Eldest Reborn. Teferi explained the danger of the rifts and the imminent collapse of the multiverse to Bolas, who agreed to seal the Madaran rift. Bolas was ambushed and attacked by the Planeswalker Leshrac, but easily defeated him. He used an enthralled Leshrac as a sacrifice to preserve his own spark while sealing the rift on the island. The two largest rifts still stood, however. In order to seal the massive Tolarian rift, Karn traveled back in time to the Phyrexian Invasion at the moment that Baron obliterated the island. Like many of the other Planeswalkers, Karn had to sacrifice his spark to combat the dangerous nature of the time rift, but was able to seal it. The last of the time rifts that was tearing Dominaria apart hovered above Otaria. Here, Jessica stood to seal one more rift, this one linked to her specifically as being caused by both the birth and death of Corona, a being whom Jessica was once a part. Accompanied by Radha and Venser, Jessica teleported into the heart of the rift. Within, the Planeswalker faced an image of Corona as the embodiment of the rift. Drawing power from her companions, she attacked her past and shattered the image of the goddess. She then sacrificed her spark and spread her Planeswalker essence over the rift and further beyond, over all the rifts and fissures of the multiverse. In one huge discharge of her power, she sacrificed herself and closed all of the rifts. This spell and moment is known as the Great Mending. The Great Mending involved the heroic intervention and sacrifice of many Planeswalkers, but saved the entire multiverse. Some of those that threw down their lives are illustrated in the saga, The Mending of Dominaria. With the last of the rifts sealed, mana flooded back into a dying Dominaria, which drank it in as though it had thirsted forever. The creatures and beings that emerged from the past, the alternate realities, the past and future, all returned to whence they came, and the temporal fabric was rewoven, stronger and sturdier than ever. But although Dominaria and the greater multiverse were spared from collapse, the Great Mending had an unforeseen effect on the nature of the Planeswalker spark and the power walkers would wield in the future. In order to heal itself fully, the multiverse needed to address the conflicting nature of its own fundamental properties with the world and reality-altering magic of godlike Planeswalkers. To correct itself and to prevent further disturbances in the fabric of reality, the multiverse created limits on what Planeswalkers could do. With the Great Mending, Planeswalkers lost their immortality and godlike status. Their power was greatly diminished. Although they retained grand magical capabilities, they could no longer command the world-shaking energy they were used to. This is seen in the card Fraying Omnipotence. Additionally, the nature of planeswalking or traversing planes in the multiverse changed. Planeswalkers, with the exception of a few, could no longer transport others with them as they walked the blind eternities. All other forms of planar travel were also rendered useless. The new generation of planeswalkers would not know what had been lost, but some older walkers silently cursed the Great Mending, angered by the power that was taken from them. But soon, machinations were put into place, plans painstakingly laid and made over years to recover even a shred of their former glory. Thanks for watching this video on the temporal crisis of Dominaria. Leave a thumbs up if you liked the video, and don't forget to subscribe for more lore content. And now I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts about the mending, as well as suggestions for future videos in the comments below. Shout out to Alex Joaquim for the intro and outro music. The references used can be found in the description. Until next time, go forth and explore the lore.